My name is Eddie Oker. I'm 29 years old, and last Christmas, my father looked me in the eyes across the dinner table and called me an idiot for keeping a gift from my grandmother. The gift was a check for $5 million. He had already torn his own in half. My mother had ripped hers into small pieces beside her wine glass. My brother crumpled his under the table like a gum wrapper. My sister walked it to the fireplace and held her phone up to film the flames. I folded mine once, put it in my bag, and said thank you. The next morning, the bank manager closed the door behind us, sat me down, and said 4 words I will never forget for the rest of my life. My name is Eddie Asher. I'm 29 years old. I teach 3rd grade at a small primary school in a town that most people drive through without stopping. I drive a Subaru with a cough in 4th gear that I've been pretending isn't getting worse for 3 years. Last Christmas, I was the person my family laughed at. Let me tell you what happened after that. My grandmother never locked her front door. Not once in 47 years. And every December, her house smelled exactly the way it had the first time I visited when I was 4. Oak smoke from the fireplace, banana bread cooling on the cutting board, and something else underneath, something faintly bitter that I couldn't name until much later. I drove up the hill in the Subaru with a paper bag full of apples from the tree I'd planted behind my rental, and she was waiting in the doorway in her corn yellow sweater and the apron she'd worn since her hip started hurting. She kissed my forehead the way she always did, one hand on my cheek, like she was confirming I was still the same person. "Tell me about your class," she said. She said it every Saturday. She always meant it. We sat at the kitchen table with mismatched mugs, and I told her about Daniel, a boy in 3rd grade who never spoke during group work but wrote paragraphs that left me a little shaken. She listened with her whole face. She asked what I thought Daniel needed. I said patience. She nodded the way she nodded when she agreed with something she already knew. I told her about the bed frame I'd bought at a flea market, missing one drawer. She laughed into her tea and said it was probably haunted by some farmer who wouldn't approve of my reading habits. Her hand trembled slightly when she put the mug down. I pretended not to see. We knitted for a while. She was working on something small and gray she didn't want to show me. I was failing, as I had been since October, to finish a scarf. Outside, the cardinals she fed every day dropped to the feeder, took a seed, and left. She watched it the way you watch someone you've been waiting on for a long time. When I left, she pressed a thick envelope into my hand on the porch. Inside were 2 crisp €10 notes for petrol. She gave me the same envelope every month. I never cashed them. I kept them in a shoebox under my bed because what she gave me wasn't money for petrol, and I had known that for a long time, even if I couldn't have said exactly what it was. I didn't know yet that it was the 3rd to last Saturday afternoon I would ever have with her. I drove down the hill with the radio off. My mother called before I had cleared the town. My mother never called to ask how I was. She called to tell me how she was and to find out what I had and to decide whether she needed any of it. "Eddie's sweetheart, have you been visiting the old woman again?" That was what she called my father's mother. Never Grandma. Never Sylvia. The old woman. "I go on Saturdays, Mom. Every Saturday." She sighed the way she sighed when she wanted to make me feel unreasonable. "She has her pension, sweetheart." My brother Grant was with her. I could hear him chewing. "Eddie, I need a lift to Dan's garage on Monday. The truck's playing up again." "I have class on Monday, Grant." "After, then." My sister Holland sent a message while I was still on the call. She lived an hour away in a bigger city with a husband she posted about online and almost never mentioned any other way. "Hey Han, can you float me 200 this week? I'll pay you back, promise." 3 little heart emojis. My mother was still talking over the silence. "Christmas dinner. Your father wants a roast. Make sure she doesn't cook for hours this year." Eddie gets so tired and then just sits there staring at everyone. Nobody asked if my grandmother was feeling all right. Nobody asked if her hip was worse. Nobody asked why her hand trembled when she poured tea. I realized I had been quietly waiting, in case one of them did. And I made a small decision on a wet country road that I didn't explain to myself until much later. "I'll see you Christmas Eve," I said. My mother's voice dropped to the register she used for advice. "Don't let her rope you into moving in with her, Eddie. She has her pride, but she'll take advantage of yours." I hung up. My father hadn't even been on the call, but somehow I could hear him. The way you hear a clock in a house where you grew up. He had been telling me for years not to let his mother take advantage of me. He used the word take advantage. In 29 years, I had never once seen my grandmother try to take advantage of anyone. The first thing my grandmother asked me to promise was not to save her life. She asked me to keep her secret. She told me on a Saturday at the end of October in her garden while we pruned the rosemary for winter. The light was low and orange, the kind of light you only get in a garden that has been tended by the same hands for 40 years. She set down the shears and sat on the bench with more weight than usual. You remember Dr. Rockford? Of course. I went to see her on Tuesday. A pause. She had never needed to be rushed. Trying to hurry my grandmother was like trying to hurry a tomato. Pancreatic, she said. Stage 4. I've known since July. The bench seemed to tilt slightly. I didn't cry. I don't know why. I think some part of me had known for months. The way you know a season is ending before a single leaf falls. Chemo? I asked. She shook her head. No. I'd rather spend what's left here. In this garden. At my kitchen table. With you on Wednesdays. Not attached to a drip. Grandma. I'm 82. Eddie. I have had a very long and very interesting life. She took my hand. Her fingers were cool, but firm. I'm not sad. I'm putting things in order. She pulled a small sprig of rosemary and pressed it into my palm. The smell of it has never left me. I have one thing to ask of you. Don't tell them. Not yet. She paused. I want Christmas to be Christmas. I don't want her father writing his eulogy at the dinner table. I want roast chicken and bad wine. I want one more year of pretending he's the man I raised. Her eye caught the light, the old familiar gleam that meant she was about to say something that would stay with me. Besides, she said, I still have some things to distribute. It's going to be a very interesting Christmas. I didn't sleep that night. Each member of my family walked into my grandmother's house that Christmas Eve with a shopping list in their head disguised as affection. My father came first, knocking his boots against the step like a man staking a claim on a room. Richard Asher had the kind of bearing that had served him for 30 years on the factory floor and that in 3 months would not be enough to keep him employed. He hung his coat on the good hook. He opened the refrigerator without asking. My mother came in behind him, complimenting things. Oh, the tree is just beautiful this year. She was appraising it. I watched her eyes move across the tinsel and the silver star my grandfather had welded in 1974, and I could see her calculating. Grant brought a girlfriend who looked 17 and wasn't, and barely said hello to my grandmother. He said hello to me. Still teaching those kids? When are you going to get a real job? He smiled as if it were a joke. It wasn't a joke, but it wasn't entirely cruel either, which was worse. Holland arrived last with her phone already raised, filming for her followers. Cozy grandma vibes, loves, you have to see this fireplace. She didn't hug my grandmother. She kissed the air near her cheek and went looking for her angles. My grandmother moved slowly from the kitchen to the table in her corn yellow sweater. She didn't say much. She watched her family with the steady, attentive calm I had seen her carry through 30 years of gatherings, the expression of a woman who had long since stopped being surprised. She caught my eye once and smiled. It was a smile that looked like sharing a joke with someone who hadn't arrived yet. Margarita, my grandmother's best friend since 1974, who ran the secondhand bookshop on the main street, stopped by to bring a jar of honey and stayed 10 minutes. Before she left, she touched my arm in the hallway. You're the only one of them she ever talks about, Mag said. I hope you know that. Bing Crosby played on the kitchen radio, skipping on the same beat it had always skipped. Nobody had ever fixed it. The roast fat crackled in the pan. My grandmother reached beside her chair and produced a small wooden box, which she placed on the table where nobody noticed it. After dinner, she stood slowly, one hand on the back of her chair, and cleared her throat in the small, precise way she cleared it before a speech. My family kept talking. They always kept talking. I have something for each of you, she said. Grant rolled his eyes at Holland. Holland returned them. My grandmother opened the wooden box and took out 5 cream-colored envelopes, unsealed, and carried them around the table, setting one beside each person. She touched my shoulder when she placed mine. My father opened his first because my father opened everything first. I watched his face move through expectation, confusion, and then something that closed like a fist. Inside was a check, written on the paper of the local bank where I passed every working day of my life. Written in my grandmother's careful, slanted blue ink. $5 million. Grant laughed before he finished reading. Grandma, is this a joke? Are we playing Monopoly? Holland held hers up to the candlelight like a piece of costume jewelry. My mother's face did something strange for a moment. For just a second, she looked like a child who'd been offered a kindness she didn't know how to hold. Then my father said, flat and loud, "It's fake. Don't be idiots." And he dropped his onto his plate. The gravy soaked into the corner. My mother tore hers in two halves, slowly, and set the pieces beside her wine glass. "Mother, this isn't funny." Grant crumpled his into a ball and rolled it under the table. Holland stood up, walked to the fireplace, and held hers to the flame. I watched the paper catch at the corner. I watched the number, 5, followed by 6 zeros, blacken and curl into a small red shape and vanish. My grandmother didn't blink. She was watching me. I took my envelope, folded the check once, and slipped it into the inside pocket of my bag. "Thank you, Grandma," I said. She nodded. Once. Nobody else noticed. I drove home that night gripping the steering wheel the way you grip a pew during a hymn at a funeral, because if you don't, your hands shake. Snow was falling hard. The wipers kept their uneven rhythm, a beat I'd learned to find comforting across 4 winters. I counted to steady myself, the way Daniel in my class counted on his fingers when he got overwhelmed. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. My grandmother had watched 4 of her grandchildren and her own son mock her to her face. She had not flinched. She had only looked at me. She was not senile. She was the sharpest person I had ever known. She read the Sunday paper cover to cover and made notes in the margins. She beat me at bridge every other week and bought herself a bar of chocolate on the week she didn't. She had once caught a mistake in my tax return from memory. And 2 weeks before Christmas, in her garden, she had asked me a question that seemed like one of her quiet, odd questions at the time. "If you had €1,000,000, Eddie, what would you do with it first?" I'd laughed. "Buy new supplies for my class. We've run out of whiteboard markers." She had nodded the way she nodded when someone had given the right answer on a test. At home, I put the check on the kitchen table and sat with it under the yellow ceiling light. The paper was thick. The security watermark shifted like oil on water when I tilted it. The account number matched the local bank where I cashed my monthly paycheck. The signature was my grandmother's, the same one I had seen on every birthday card since I learned to read. On the back, in the same blue ink, for the one who kept coming on Saturdays. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. The next morning I drove to the bank. Not to cash it, just to ask. The branch manager's name was Benito. He had known me since I was 16. He had a mustache he'd grown before it came back into fashion and a small plastic horse on his desk that I had always assumed belonged to some child who had grown up. He smiled when I saw me come through the door. A minute later, he wasn't smiling. "Benito, I'm sorry to bother you the day after Christmas." I slid the check across the desk. "I just wanted to verify this. My grandmother gave it to me last night." He looked at it. His smile faltered. Then something behind his eyes changed, and he picked it up with both hands. His face did something I had only read about in books. The color left it. He went the color of the inside of an envelope. "Eddie," he said my name the way a doctor says it. "Can you come with me for a moment?" He led me through the cashier area, past the Christmas wreath by the vault door, and into a small private room with a long table and no windows. He held the door, closed it, slid the small bolt. "Sit down." He sat across from me and folded his hands and looked at the check, and then at me, and then at the check again. "Have you read what she wrote on the back?" "Yes." He took a breath. "Your grandmother came in the first week of November. She transferred funds into a special account. She had 5 of these prepared. I'm the one who put them on paper." He paused. "Eddie, they are as real as the chair you're sitting in." I counted backward from 10 the way I told Daniel to do, and I looked at the small plastic horse in the corner of his desk. "Miss Asher." Benito's voice went very professional. I'm going to ask you to stay seated. This is real. All of it is real. Another pause. And this is only part of it. There is a solicitor who will be contacting you. I'm not at liberty to say more. I left the bank with 5 million euros in my account, and the feeling that I was not going to do anything that changed my life that week. My grandmother had been a millionaire for longer than I had been alive, and the only person in our family who had ever thought to ask about her financial advisor was the cashier who processed her pension check. I went straight from the bank to her house, still in my winter coat, still with the smell of Benito's office on my sleeves. She had coffee on. She was not surprised to see me. She had never once in my 29 years been surprised to see me. You went to the bank. Yes. Benito was terrified. She smiled into her mug, the chipped one with a cardinal painted on it, the one older than me, and pushed a second cup across the table. Sit down, sweetheart. She told me everything then. Her husband had left her 400,000 euros in 1998, a house and a garden. She had been 55. She'd spent 30 years as a music teacher and had never bought a single share in her life. So she went to the library, read, and wrote letters to a man in another city who had written a financial column in a magazine she liked. His name was Mr. Garcia. He wrote back. We corresponded for 17 years, she said. We never met. He died in 2015. A pause. He left me 40% of his company. Grandma. Approximately 40 million euros, Eddie, depending on the day of the market. I set down my coffee cup. Why did nobody ever know? Because nobody ever asked. She said it without bitterness. The way you state the weather. Your father asked me once, in 2003, if he could manage my money. I said no. He never asked again. He didn't ask because he wanted to help. She reached across and pressed my hand. He asked because he wanted control. And I am not obligated to hand my life to someone who confuses those two things. She looked at me steadily. I didn't give them money last night, Eddie. I gave them one last chance to ask me why. And they didn't ask. A pause. It took them exactly 112 minutes to stop calling the check fake and start calling it theirs. The call started while I was still sitting at her kitchen table. My phone, face down on the surface, buzzed 32 times in 45 minutes. I counted because I couldn't think of anything else to do. Holland's messages came in a cascade. I need my check. I changed my mind. It was an accident. Eddie, babe, can we talk? I have to pay the storage unit. You don't need that much. Be fair. Grant's voicemail was louder. Give that back. That's family money, you little, do you hear me? My mother cried in her message. The particular way she cried. The soft, performed weeping with a hiccup at the end. Eddie, sweetheart, you don't understand what you're doing to this family. I have been so patient. I have never asked you for anything. I looked at my grandmother. She was eating a piece of toast. She was watching the storm she had made with the calm attention of a woman who had been waiting for it to arrive. I'm going to turn this off, I said. Good. My father arrived 40 minutes later. I saw his truck through the kitchen window, coming up the path at the speed he used when he wanted to look reasonable on the outside while burning on the inside. My grandmother walked to the front door. She didn't open it. She stood beside the glass. My father knocked. Tried the handle. Mom, open the door. Richard, she said through the glass. It's the 26th of December. This is not a good time. You gave Eddie 5 million. I gave each of you 5 million. 4 of you burned it. Mom. Richard, go home. She didn't raise her voice. I'll see you when I see you. She turned the key in the lock for the first time in 47 years. My father stood on the porch for a long time. Then he left. My grandmother came back to the table and picked up her toast. Well, she said, that's the beginning. She broke her hip in January, a Tuesday. She'd gone out to put seeds down for the cardinal and slipped on a patch of ice hidden under snow. She lay there for 40 minutes before Mag, passing on her way to the bookshop, noticed the front door standing open. The hospital wanted to admit her. She wanted palliative care at home. She had written the paperwork for it 3 months earlier, and the solicitor had already notarized it. I applied for leave from the primary school, where I taught. The headmistress, A quiet woman named Mrs. Osgood looked at me across her desk for a long moment and said, "Take whatever time you need, Eddie. Come back when you come back." I moved into my grandmother's guest room, the one with pressed flowers on the wall and a quilt her own mother had made. I set up a baby monitor on her nightstand. Every night I read to her. She liked literary fiction, especially My Antonia by Willa Cather, which had been a wedding gift from her mother. I read slowly. She closed her eyes. Sometimes she corrected my pronunciation of a prairie town name. Sometimes she was asleep. The honey and lemon water on her nightstand froze at the edges overnight because the radiator was old and the walls were thin. And every morning when I changed it, I noticed with a small, frightened tenderness that my hand was smaller than hers had been and that I would never reach that size. One Thursday near the end, she asked me to open the top drawer of her dresser. Inside was a brass key on a leather cord. She pressed it into my palm. "When Halverson calls," she said, "give it to him. He'll know what it opens." "Grandma." "Soon, Eddie. But not yet. And it's all right." She died the way she had lived, on her own terms, without fuss, in a room that smelled of old books and wool. It was the 3rd of February, a Tuesday, 5:47 in the morning. I know because I looked at the small travel clock on her nightstand, the one her husband had given her for their honeymoon in 1962, the one that kept slightly wrong time and that she had never once corrected. She had been quiet for 2 days. The morning before, she had squeezed my hand and said, "Eddie, I am so proud of you." After that, she said nothing. I was dozing in the chair when I woke up because the boiler in the basement switched off. The house went very still. And I understood, in a way that was not understanding in any ordinary sense, that she was gone. Her hand was still in mine, still warm. I didn't cry right away. I sat for a while. I listened to the morning. The radiator knocked once. The cardinal came to the feeder, took a seed, flew. Then I called Mag. She was there in under an hour. She sat beside the bed and held the other hand, the one she had been holding, in one way or another, since 1974. I called my father after. He picked up on the 4th ring. I told him. He was silent for a moment, and then his voice broke, and I thought for 1 second that he was, after all, a human being. Then my mother got on the line. Her first words were, "When will the funeral be, Eddie?" "I have a commitment on the 10th. I hung up. The funeral was that Saturday. My grandmother had left written instructions. She wanted her corn yellow sweater. She wanted to be buried beside her husband in the small cemetery behind the Lutheran church she had never attended. She did not want my father to give a eulogy. She wanted me to read a poem. They all came. They cried loudly. My father wore a black suit that no longer fit. My mother gripped his arm. Holland filmed the procession from behind her sunglasses and posted it afterward with a filter that softened the edges. The caption said, "Healing." I filmed nothing. I didn't cry until that night. My father called the solicitor before the gravediggers had finished their coffee. Halverson told me this later, with the dry amusement of a man who had been representing my grandmother long enough to find it clarifying rather than shocking. 3 voicemails before noon on the day of the funeral. All of them asking when the will would be read. Grant came to my house the night after, walked in without knocking. We had grown up in a house where nobody knocked, and sat on the edge of my sofa in his funeral suit and asked, without preamble, if I knew who got the house. "No, Grant. You were there every week." Surely she said something? We talked about my students. We talked about her garden. We talked about bridge. I don't know what's in the will, and I don't care. He looked at me for a long moment the way Grant looked at people when he was trying to decide if they were lying. Grant had never been very good at reading people. He took a beer from my refrigerator without asking and left. Halverson called the following Monday. He was exactly as I remembered from the one time I'd met him at my grandmother's table, a tall, unhurried man in a gray suit with a voice like a cello string. "Miss Asher, your grandmother retained me for many years. The reading of her will is scheduled for the 20th of February at 10 a.m. All immediate family members are cited. I would like you to be present. Of course, there is a safety deposit box in my office that she arranged. I will ask at the reading whether you have a key." "I have it." A small pause. "Good. Another pause. Miss Asher, may I ask you something? Of course. Did she tell you what's in the will? He was quiet for a long time. It will surprise someone, he said finally. Then a dry laugh just once. Miss Asher, it will surprise everyone in that room except you and me. And you, I think, just a little. The day of the reading was a Friday. I wore a gray dress. I drove to town with a set of assumptions that turned out to be completely wrong. Halverson's meeting room had a wooden clock on the wall, and that clock was louder than any clock I had ever heard in my life. My father sat on one side of the table, my mother beside him, hand on his sleeve, Grant across from them, Holland at the end, phone in hand until Halverson asked her to put it away. Mag sat next to me. I had asked her to come. My grandmother had asked her to come. Halverson opened a dark green folder, put on his reading glasses, and did not look at any of us. This is the last will and testament of Sylvia Mary Gold Asher, dated the 14th of April, 2022. Witnessed by Margarita and Dr. Ockford. Notarized in my presence. He read through the preamble. He read the specific bequests. The chipped cardinal mug to me. The bridge set to Mag. The welded star to the Lutheran Church. The piano to the primary school where I taught. My father's jaw was already tight. The principal remainder of the estate, Halverson read, comprising the family residence, the 22 adjoining acres, all investment accounts, and all remaining personal effects, with a net value of approximately 40.2 million euros after the 5 gifts already distributed. The clock was very loud. The testator leaves in its entirety to her granddaughter, Aiden Rosario Asher. Nobody spoke. My father's face didn't change for 3 full seconds. Then he stood up. It's a joke. Mr. Asher, please sit down. It's a joke. It is a legal document. Please sit down. My mother made a small sound, like a cup set down too hard. Grant's eyes were on me. Holland had her phone out again. Halverson read the attached clause of reasons in the same steady voice. I leave this to my granddaughter Aiden. She is the only one who visited on Saturdays. She came with no reason other than love. She cared for me at the end of my life. Not once did she ask what I had. My father sat down. He stared at the table. Mag took my hand under the table. I held on. The lawsuit arrived in the mail 4 days after the reading. I knew before I opened it which of them had been first to file. A thick manila envelope. I smelled the paper. Stress does strange things. It smelled like paper and toner and old leather from the solicitor's office where it had been prepared. The suit was filed in the name of Richard Asher, Glenda Asher, Grant Asher, Briggs Asher. The cause of action was undue influence. They alleged I had manipulated an elderly and ill woman into leaving me her entire estate. I sat on the kitchen floor and laughed. Not a good laugh. The kind you make when the only alternative is to throw something across the room. I called Halverson. He had been expecting it. I'll represent you, Miss Asher. At no charge. I owe your grandmother 3 decades of trust. Let me finish what she started. The case would not be heard until October. I would spend 7.5 months with my family's names on a lawsuit beside mine. I went back to work on Monday. Daniel was glad to see me. The safety deposit box my grandmother had left me a key for contained no stock certificates, no deeds. It contained evidence that she had been paying attention for a very long time. Halverson drove to the house with me on a Saturday in May when the lilacs were just starting. The box was at the back of her bedroom wardrobe, behind a row of cardigans. I turned the brass key. Inside were 3 things. The first was a thick legal folder. The will, the notarized documents, 3 separate capacity assessments by Dr. Ockford, one from 2022 at the time of signing, one in 2023 as a follow-up, one in 2024 at my grandmother's own insistence. All clean, all dated, all signed. The third had been conducted 11 weeks before her death. Halverson allowed himself a small, grave smile. Your grandmother, he said, understood litigation. The second thing was a bundle of letters. Every birthday card I had ever sent her, starting with a crayon drawing when I was 4. She had kept them all. She had labeled each one by year in small pencil on the back. The third was a leather album, soft at the corners, tied with a cord she had replaced at least once. I opened it on the floor of her bedroom. It was a diary of a kind, one entry per page in her slanted hand. A date, a few words, sometimes a press leaf, or a feather, or a ticket stub. The judge who ruled on my grandmother's will had gone to school with her in 1962. She said so twice before the hearing began. Her name was Judge Bernarda Ames, and she would ordinarily have recused herself for relationships closer than acquaintances. She and my grandmother had been in a graduating class of 51. That counted as acquaintances. She could hear the case. She announced this in open court, and the lawyer my family had hired did not object because he knew, I think, that he had nothing better to hope for. Halverson was serene. He walked the judge through the will, the medical assessments, the witness affidavits. Dr. Ockford took the stand in a navy suit and spoke with the clean precision of a woman who had testified before. 3 assessments, all concluding full testamentary capacity. The third completed 11 weeks before my grandmother's death. Mag took the stand next, wearing her reading glasses and a small silver brooch my grandmother had given her for her 50th birthday. Your Honor, Mag said, Sylvia Asher and I played bridge every Wednesday for 40 years. In her last week, she still remembered a hand I played badly in September of 1987, and she was still laughing at me for it. My family's lawyer crossed to examine me. Miss Asher, did you ever suggest to your grandmother how she should distribute her estate?
No, sir.
Did you discuss her finances with her?
No.
I didn't know she had any worth discussing. Did you ever encourage her to favor you?
No, sir.
Then, in your opinion, why did she leave everything to you? I hadn't prepared for that question. I thought for a moment. I looked at Mag. I looked at the empty seat beside her, where no one had chosen to sit. Because I came on Saturdays, Your Honor, I said. That was the only reason. The judge wrote something in her notes. I couldn't read it. She looked up. This court finds the will valid as executed. The challenge is dismissed. Reasonable costs of the defense shall be borne by the plaintiffs. Halverson pressed my shoulder once. I did not look at my father. My father called me his worst daughter in front of a local journalist in the marble corridor outside the courtroom. The marble is unforgiving with anger. 3 people turned their heads, including a young woman with a press lanyard and a notebook. She did not look away. She made a small, deliberate note. I didn't respond. I kept walking, Halverson's hand on my elbow, guiding me gently toward the stairs. Grant came behind us. Don't you feel guilty? He said, not quite shouting. I stopped. I turned. Grant had been my older brother for 29 years. He had pushed me into a swimming pool when I was 6. He had helped me move 3 times. He had borrowed money he never returned. He had stood dry-eyed at the coffin. No, Grant, I said. Not even a little. Holland had been live-streaming from inside the courtroom. The bailiff had asked her to stop twice. She ignored him. The platform removed her video within the hour for violating courtroom broadcasting rules. She lost, according to a comment she made afterward, 7,000 followers in a single afternoon. She had crossed the line from grieving family member to public embarrassment in front of a very audience that had been paying her. The newspaper article ran on Tuesday morning. The headline was measured. Probate court upholds contested will in Asher estate. The body was factual, but there was a quoted passage, my father's words, verbatim, in a pull quote on page 2. And there was a small detail in the final paragraph that I didn't notice at first. Mr. Asher was made redundant from a regional manufacturing firm earlier this year. The company announced its closure in March. It was not a vengeful detail. It was a journalist doing her job. But it was published in a town that read every word. A small town has a long memory, especially for people who burn money in front of the dying. My mother's spa had a grand opening sign that had been there for 2 years, the pink faded and hanging slightly crooked. She started losing clients in the 3rd week of November. Not all at once. A regular Tuesday appointment stopped booking. The woman who ran the flower shop across the street, who had been my grandmother's friend in the church choir, walked past the spa 3 weeks running without looking in. My mother called me in December, crying, asking if I could help. I said no, kindly, and she hung up. Grant's construction office, run from a rented corner of a warehouse, was seized at the end of January. 3 months of unpaid rent. The landlord, who had gone to school with my father, had been patient. The local paper printed the seizure notice in the back section, the way it printed all seizures. People read the back section. My father didn't find another job. He applied at 3 places and received no callbacks. He was 58 years old and had spent 30 years at the same factory and was now a species the job market had quietly declared extinct. My mother moved in with her sister in November. My father stayed alone in the house where I had grown up. And then there was Holland. The article the paper had published had been picked up quietly by a regional human interest blog, which had led to a thread of follow-up comments, which had led to a message that a woman from another city sent to Holland's husband Marquez about certain credit card balances belonging to a certain wife that seemed inconsistent with the household income. Marquez, who had been quietly suspicious for over a year, checked. He found 80,000 euros of debt Holland had been hiding. He filed for divorce in April. Holland moved in with my mother before the end of May. She had lost 12,000 followers and whatever influence she had mistakenly believed she held over our father. I was sitting at my own kitchen table when I read the message from Mag telling me about the divorce. My friend Teo was across from me.
You didn't do this, he said.
I know. We sat with it anyway. What no one in my family had ever taken the trouble to learn about my grandmother was that she had been quietly feeding the school their children attended for 40 years. I found this out on a warm Saturday in May while going through her desk. I had decided not to sell the house. I couldn't. I had told Mag she could use the 2 front rooms for a second location of her bookshop. She cried, then agreed, then brought boxes. We were clearing drawers together when I found the notebook. Small, soft leather, tied with an old brown cord. It slid out of the lower right drawer, the kind of hiding place you use when you don't want to be caught being kind. I opened it. Each page was a year. Each year had a single line. 1985, milk program, 840 pesetas. 1986, milk 900. Textbooks, 100. 1987, milk 950. Library, 400. It continued for 40 years. The last entry was from November the previous year.
Milk. Books.
New drum kit for the music room. The running total in the margin. In her firm handwriting, 284,000 euros. The primary school where I taught. The school where Daniel, my 3rd grade student who never spoke in group work, drank a small carton of milk at every lunch because it was part of what the school called its nutrition program, which was funded in its entirety each year by a private, anonymous donor whom nobody had ever met. I sat on her kitchen floor. I put the notebook in my lap. I didn't move for an hour. A pressed leaf, an oak leaf, fell from the inside back cover. She had written beneath it in pencil, Benji's first day, October 1984. I didn't know who Benji was. I asked Mag later. Mag looked at me for a long moment. Your father, she said quietly, was a boy starting school. My grandmother had begun feeding the school the year after her own son started there. She had fed it through his childhood, his adolescence, his graduation, his marriages, his children, his grandchildren. She had fed the school that fed all of us. She had never told any of us, including the one who spent her days teaching inside it, the same one whose whiteboard marker she had been anonymously funding for a decade, without that person ever knowing. I created the foundation with Halverson. 20 million euros. The Sylvia Asher Education Fund. It would cover tuition, books, and milk for any student who needed it, from primary school through university, across our region. Halverson wept quietly in his office when I signed the papers. The only time I ever saw him cry. He had loved her. I had always known. I didn't sell the house. I gave Mag the right to use it for her bookshop for the rest of her life. She named the new branch Sylvia's second reading. She painted the sign herself. I applied for a 4th grade position in a small coastal town I had chosen from a road atlas because the name sounded like something my grandmother would have liked. I didn't visit first. I did the interview by phone. They offered me the job 2 days later, 41,000 euros a year, which was the salary I had always had, and the salary I intended to keep. My father left one voicemail in June, asking if we could meet. Just us.
Just for coffee.
He said he had things he wanted to say. I listened to it 3 times. Then I wrote him a single email. Dad, I'm not going to stop loving the person you should have been, but I can't keep writing the letter for you. Take care of yourself.
Eddie.
I packed what fit in the car. It fit in the car. The first coffee I drank in my new town was the worst coffee I had tasted in my life, and I laughed out loud in the car park. I had driven 2 days on national roads and country lanes. The Subaru's fourth gear coughed the whole way. I had my grandmother's corn yellow sweater folded on the passenger seat because I hadn't been able to put it in a box. I stopped at a petrol station somewhere on the route. They had coffee in a machine that looked like it had been installed in the 1980s. I bought a cup and drank it in the car park, and it was objectively a disaster, and I stood there and laughed, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't made in a year, and startled a man who was putting air in a tire. I arrived in the coastal town at sunset. It was small in the way small towns are small. One high street, a post office, 2 bars, a hardware shop that had become a wool shop, a bakery closed on Tuesdays. The cottage I'd rented sat on a headland half a kilometer out. Gray cladding, weathered porch with 2 rocking chairs, one missing a slat. The landlord had left the key under the pot as promised. I opened the door and stood in the hallway. The cottage smelled of cedar and sea. It was empty. It was quiet. The kitchen had a cast iron range I didn't yet know how to use. The sitting room had a window facing the Atlantic and a slightly uneven floor that creaked when you crossed it. I carried the corn yellow sweater into the sitting room and draped it over the arm of the single armchair the previous tenant had left, a big green wingback that sat facing the window. The sleeve fell over the arm exactly the way it used to fall over the arm of my grandmother's kitchen chair. I looked at it for a long time. In the postbox that afternoon, there was a single envelope. Mag's handwriting. Inside, a card and a letter. The letter was brief. Eddie, I knew you'd end up somewhere like this. She told me so 10 years ago. She said, Eddie is a coast person. She just hasn't told herself yet. Welcome home. Love, Mag. By the following June, I had a 4th grade classroom that faced the Atlantic and a yellow cat who believed the corn yellow sweater belonged to him. The cat arrived in late June, thin and amber, with a broken ear and a firm, skeptical way of looking at people. He came through the screen door I hadn't latched properly. He climbed onto the sweater on the wingback chair and fell asleep. I didn't have the heart to move him. I called him Cthulhu. He slept on the sweater every night. Every morning I had to ask his permission to borrow it. He would look at me with one yellow eye half open, as if he had inherited the memory directly and merely tolerated my use of it on loan. On a Saturday in August, I sat on a porch that belonged to me and wrote a letter that didn't need to be sent. The sun was setting over the bay, 10 minutes later than it set behind my grandmother's hill. I had been tracking this for some reason. I had sat through all 10 of those extra minutes that evening, the way you stay for the credits of a film you don't want to end. The letter was to her. I told her about Rosario, the quiet girl in my class who didn't speak in group work, who had started raising her hand by May. I told her about the 8 floorboards that creaked, and the day the headmistress brought Cthulhu a treat, and the cat regarded it with my grandmother's exact expression of polite skepticism. I told her about the sweater and the way it draped, and the view of the water, and the coffee that had been terrible and tasted like a rival. I told her I had understood something. I hadn't won because I had the money. I had the money now, and most of it wasn't mine, and never would be. I had won because I knew how to stay beside someone who was leaving. Because I had come on Saturdays without a reason. Because when she gave me a check that my entire family laughed at, I had put it in my bag and said thank you. Because when she had asked me in October in her garden what I would do with €1,000,000, I had told her I would buy whiteboard markers for my class, and she had looked at me the way a person looks at an answer they have been waiting their whole life to hear. I folded the letter, put it in the small wooden box she had placed on the table that Christmas Eve, the one that had brought me here, to the coast, to the creaking floors and the Atlantic and the yellow cat who owned what I only borrowed. I closed the lid. I stood up. Cthulhu was watching me through the open window with the lordly patience of a creature ready for his dinner. I'm coming, I said. I went inside. The money builds classrooms now. The sweater keeps a cat warm. And every Saturday morning, before I do anything else, I make coffee, bad or good, and sit with the window facing the water. It was the only thing she ever asked me to do.
Just keep coming.
It turns out that was everything